NAFI would like to thank AOPA for their generous support for this episode of the More Right Rudder podcast. Hi, listeners. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of More Right Rudder. My name is Sarah Stout. I'm the Program Development Manager here at NAFI and your host for this podcast. In this episode, we welcome a very special guest. Julian Thorpe is the Program Manager of Flight Training Security Programs with the TSA. Julian and her team took the time to come to the NAFI Summit, hosted at Embry-Riddle University in Daytona Beach, Florida in January of 2025. While we were there, we were able to get together and record this episode for you on the ins and outs of the new flight training security rules that were implemented in 2024. Podcast listeners who view this content on YouTube will notice that we are sitting together in the same room. This is not our traditional Zoom setup that we use. So you'll see us passing the mic back and forth and palm trees in the background. So it's a nice change of pace from our usual recording setup. It was a lot of fun. And this episode is jam-packed with everything you would need to know to operate under the new flight training security rules. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to NAFI. We're happy to help guide you through the new program. And the Flight Training Security Program portal website also has some really great resources. So be sure to check it out. We'll put a link in the show notes, and let's move on to our main content with Julian. Thank you. All right, Julian, thank you for joining us today on More Right Rudder. We're excited we were able to connect with you here at the NAFI Summit. So that's why the background looks different. We are in Daytona Beach. So we're very excited to be here. And this is a good opportunity for us to connect with you about the TSA policy change, rule change from last fall. So can you give us just a high level history on where TSA rules originated and how we ended up in our current rulemaking state?
Well, everybody knows that with 2004, we started off with what we considered the interim final rule. And I understand that some people did not realize it was an interim final rule we were acting on for many years. And then in 2018, we started having meetings with industry representatives, as well as putting out for public comment. And then we went back to rulemaking and started with a final rule. It was published May 1st of 2024. And became effective July 30th, 2024, 90 days past publication.
Okay. All right. So we're about 6 months into this new rule. And I know industry, NAFI and a handful of others have tried to do a lot of good industry outreach about this. And I attended one of the sessions that TSA did for industry outreach. My gosh, you guys did what, 10 of those, 8 of those? There was a good number.
We have more starting soon.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. But we didn't get to all the flight instructors. And so we want to take some time to talk through the biggest changes, because previously you only had to register with what we called the TSA's website if you were training non-US citizens. Right. And so now the rule change is all flight instructors need to register with that website. So can you talk us through the reasoning behind that change and what benefit there is to both the TSA and the flight instructors? It's a mutual benefit.
All right. So anyways, correct. If one was training non-US citizens, non-US nationals, one was registered as a provider on the FTSP portal. However, with a final rule, we've created a security coordinator. That position, that role, is for all flight training providers. So therefore, how it would affect your membership for NAFI would be the Part 61s traditionally, and also the CFIs. So if the Part 61s have CFIs that are working for them as employees, but yet the relationship is with the student, the Part 61 administration, they would then register the CFIs as provider agents. So you still have the provider admin, and then the rest of the CFIs would be the provider agents. However, some Part 61s, the flight schools or flight clubs, excuse me, what they'll do is they have no relationship that way. Everything is between the CFI and the student or the candidate, as the final rule has deemed as a term. And then what they will do is then they will create their account. They are provider admin by default because they're creating an account for themselves, and they would designate themselves as security coordinator. That's the registration with the portal is for security coordinator position. And then the security coordinator information has to be updated within 5 days. So for instance, there's your phone number, if it gets updated, your email address or your location, AOR, your location of training. So if one is going from one area to another, they would need to update that. And that security coordinator role actually is a role that is with other populations that TSA does the vetting for. And so in essence, FTSP is becoming more in line with the norm or how other programs are moving to a particular individual within an organization to be a liaison between TSA and that organization.
Okay, so the security coordinator piece is new for flight instructors.
Correct.
And so if you previously had been a flight school administrator, which I was at a couple of places, that role really hasn't changed too significantly. You're basically just there. So the TSA has someone to contact in regards to your flight training activities. So if you're at a larger school, whether it's 141 or 61, say you guys for TSA purposes, there's really no differentiation, correct? They're flight training providers. So, they might have that administrative structure that you spoke to where one person is the administrator and then the agents, but independent instructors have to tick all those boxes for themselves.
Correct.
So that's where I know I've seen the most confusion among the independent instructors is, well, do I need to hire someone to be my security coordinator or any of that? And the answer is no, you're your own. And it's just the TSA can get a hold of you should anything come up with one of the applicants or candidates that they're working with.
Or whatever other reason TSA would need to reach out. It's better to have systems put in place prior to the need.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, again, because I know FAA and I hear the industry talk a lot about, like, sir, the S word is the safety. For TSA, that S word is security.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Yeah. So having a place to contact you. And then also, I know one challenge that the TSA had in the past was even knowing where these independent instructors were. Because I was at a school, it was a Part 61 provider, but we happened to have some international students. And so that was the only way we got on the TSA's radar. And we did get inspected. The inspector who came to my facility was just the absolute nicest guy. We had all of our ducks in a row and it was a breeze for us. And he called maybe 2-3 weeks of when he wanted to come in advance and gave us a slate of date and time. So it was a very easy process for us. And he showed up right on time. And I don't think he was there. I don't even remember how long, but it wasn't long. It was a perfectly nice gentleman. We sat in a conference room, flipped through giant binders of passport scans and security awareness training. And we had it all alphabetized and dated and it was a breeze.
Perfect.
So that new portal will help make sure that the TSA can get to those to make sure even they're doing the U.S. citizens, because that is an included part of the inspection and oversight. It's not just the non-U.S. citizens, non-residents.
Right. And also to share with you, part of our intentions with record keeping is to expand the FTSP provider portals to encompass record keeping repository. That is a feature coming in the future for the IT system guys are working on it right now. And so anyways, that's what our big hope is that this preview for inspectors can be done virtually online before they arrive. So anyways, that's a feature, again, we're looking to build in the future.
That will be very nice. I can tell you as someone who's done that flight training providing, that would be fantastic. Because we were keeping electronic records within our system so we could audit, but then we also had the paper records because just in case, it was a third party provider for the electronics. So in case, something horrific happened there. We had all the binders locked in the fireproof file cabinets and all that too. So to continue here, for flight instructors, once they independent flight instructors and basically any flight training provider, once they're registered in the system, they've identified their security coordinator, which for a good population of this audience will be themselves. When they're conducting flight training with US citizens, that process then hasn't really changed beyond the website registration for US citizens.
The students aren't registering on the system. The only thing changing is identifying the security coordinator. Everything else prior to is still staying the same. Nothing's changing for that provider, other than the fact that security awareness training is no longer annual, it's now biannual. And or up to 2 years is actually the language. So therefore, if a school or an individual, CFI, wanted to still continue to do it annually, they could. They wanted to go to 18 months, they can. There's a little bit more leeway there, and including a 30-day grace period, which is noted in one of the bookmarks or the footnotes within the preamble of the final rule published on May 1st.
All right. So most of our flight instructors, they've registered, they've named themselves as security coordinator, which by my understanding is automatic in the system as long as it's an individual account. Do they have any additional button pushing to make themselves security coordinator in the system once they've registered?
They should double check to make sure that the security coordinator has populated. That role is populated. If not, then just manually do it. I'm the kind of person where I double check my tech. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So anyways, do double check to make sure that there wasn't a glitch in the system.
Okay. Yeah. Trust and verify with technology. So we've all been there with that. All right. So for those who are just strictly training US citizens, they're registered and they'll keep verifying their documents, making their endorsements, keeping the same things they were before for the same certificates and ratings. All that is the same. The bigger change for those who train non-US citizens, now we're going from clearances for individual certificates and ratings to these longer term clearances and training events. So can you talk us through the basics of that change?
Yes, it was in the past where a training request was attached to the provider. So in essence, there was one event and therefore the student would pay the $130 and they'd get their security awareness security threat assessment application. It would go to green light. And then the training would occur. And then down the road, the person wanted to go for their next rating, they'd have to do another one. Now, the time period, instead of that, what used to be, you had to start training within 180 days. And then the training request was good for 360 days or 1 year. Now it is 5 years. So I, as an individual, Julian Thorpe, I'm a Canadian citizen. I'm in Toronto. I'm going to upload my documents. I'm going to then get my documents accepted. I'll receive an email saying, hey, great, now let's go get your fingerprints. So then I'll go get my fingerprints. And then TSA will say, great, fingerprints received. And then we go through, eventually I'll get a determination of eligibility, and that's a new language for us. So I get a determination of eligibility, and that is good for up to 5 years. So in essence, if my visa, my passport, or any of my documentation ends up expiring during that 5-year period, I still have a determination of eligibility, but I may be ineligible for training. So that's what's going to happen. So the providers are going to be able to see that Julian Thorpe, let's say after 3 years, my passport expired and I didn't update it in the system. So what will happen is that I'll get notified and that I need to update it. The provider will continue training on that one event that they were authorized to do, and then they cannot create another training event. But it's a 5-year period. And just to share with you also, the candidate will be able to submit for renewal to their determination of eligibility up to 6 months prior to expiration of that 5 years. So after 4.5 years, they can submit another one. And the current fee is $140.
All right. All right. That's really good information. So that, as someone who has put students or learners through the system, that's going to make it a lot easier and much more flexible for the applicant as well. 'Cause I've had foreign applicants who were doing well in their training, and then they had a family event occur, they took a break, and then they had to reapply and repay the fee and all that just to do all that. And so having that 5 years would really open that up. And to make sure we're all on the same page, once they have that security threat assessment for 5 years, when the candidate then approaches a flight training provider, the flight training provider initiates a training event within the portal. And they don't need any further clearance or anything. It's more of a reporting structure for that. And then that candidate, say they breeze through private, they can just jump right into instrument as long as it's still within their 5-year eligibility period.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So that makes it so much easier and less administrative burden, all for that same $140. So that also saves the applicants a good portion as well. Yeah. That I remember that being a headache for some, but it sounds kind of silly to fuss over $140 when you're talking about a $12,000 private pilot certificate. But it's one of those things that just feels to have to jump through all those hoops. So to make that so much easier will be good for everybody.
The term we're using is portability. The determination of eligibility allows portability for the student or the candidate. Again, with our terminology is the candidate. And we think it's a great benefit. Great benefit.
Yeah, that's the other thing to touch on, like the good portability. And you mentioned that earlier in this recording that, it's no longer tied to a specific provider. So should they have to move or relocate? Because I've certainly worked with applicants who were in the United States for their spouse's job. And then their spouse got reassigned to a location. So, they and their family went with it, but then they had to do the whole process again with their new flight training provider. So in scenarios like that, this is going to be fantastic. Now that we're about 6 months in, has the TSA observed any initial compliance issues or common issues bringing the flight instructor population on board with this new rule?
Not so much issues, as with when there's major changes in most systems, there's a little bit of a growing pains and a little bit of a learning curve. And so in essence, what's happening is that it used to be when the training request was tied to the provider, there was knowledge of. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to where our relationship is with the candidate for that security threat assessment no longer is tied with the provider. So I can imagine some providers whose systems are based on having knowledge of when were documents accepted, when did the fingerprint instructions get sent to the candidate. That information is no longer visible in the system through the FTSP portal system.
Yeah, I remember getting lots of emails.
Yes. So now the question becomes is how do we as a group come together and brainstorm to create solutions or to create new systems to support that kind of situation? Because think about this, is that this is right now the first 6 months. We are technically past implementation and we're going into how the system should be working in the future. So anyways, that's why when you talk about having all those webinars, we had an implementation webinar series. Our last one will be tomorrow. And then we'll take a break in February. We'll restart in March, and it's going to be focused instead of on implementation of the final rule. We're actually going to be moving into FAQs. We're going to be going back through all the questions and seeing if there's certain themes. And we're going to be then addressing those within those webinars in the month of March. So anyways, again, just to share with you, we do send out emails to the provider admins of each of the registered flight training providers. And so we'll just keep going and we'll continue with the webinar series.
So all the more reason to get registered. So you get that continued outreach and education directly from the source. So that's why there was not a a podcast episode on this and someone else from industry talking about it. We wanted to talk to the TSA. And so here we are. We are thrilled. Julian was able to join us. And one final note I did want to touch on before we part here, because we're 6 months into this new rule. So individuals and candidates who were cleared previously, like on the 12-month, they're still bound by that, correct? And then once that expires, or if they continue their training, if they complete before that 12-month period, at that point they'll transition
Yes,
to the flight threat assessment 5-year model.
correct.
Okay.
To get their determination of eligibility, so they'll submit a new application.
Okay. All right. So there's not like an automatic rollover or anything. So if you were cleared on that, you're on that. And then next time around, you'll move to the new model.
Right.
All right. So make sure you're still paying attention to the portal. Just because we're 6 months into this doesn't mean your candidate doesn't expire soon. They weren't automatically carried over onto this. So I think that knocks out our list. Thank you so much for joining us today, Julian. We are so glad you took the time to come down to NAFI Summit. You've been here for both couple of days and taken the special time to join us here. We're in a briefing room in the student union at Embry-Riddle recording our podcast, and it's been a wonderful summit, and we're so glad that you took the time to join us for more Right Rudder.
Thanks for the invite.
Thank you. Listeners to the More Right Rudder podcast can get $10 off their NAFI membership. Use the code POD49, POD49, at checkout at nafinet.org. This code is good for both new and renewal memberships.